Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick with Indieoogle, and it's been a while since I have made a video, and I'm sorry about that. I've actually got a new computer, and I've been experimenting with the settings, and I have no idea how to get the quality on that up to the level that it was on my previous, or this computer. So I'm still working on that. I'm not going to release a video with downgraded quality. I just refuse to do that. So I've kind of got some space issues and things like that. But I'm still working towards it. I've been trying to sign on and respond to any messages that you guys have left me. And you've actually brought up some good ideas for videos, and I plan on getting to those. But first, there's a few things that I think you guys should know before I cover some of those things. Two of which would be loops and arrays. Before I cover arrays, I think it's more important that you know loops, because to do advanced arrays, you're gonna need to know how to do loops. So that's what I'll be covering in this tutorial, loops. Now there's multiple kinds of loops. There's the for loop, which is what I use the most, the while loop, and the do until loop. Now, the do until loop and the while loop are actually very similar, but I'll tell the difference between those when I get to them. So the first one I'm going to be using is the for loop, not necessarily because the syntax is any easier of the other two, but because the other two are, shall I say, more dangerous. Excuse me. Because they sometimes can lock up your computer if you aren't particularly experienced in using them. So what I'll be doing is I'll first set up a variable. I'll call it in, and now we'll actually start describing the for loop. First, you want to type in for, and then in some parentheses you want to add parameters. Now for the for loop, you have to use a variable specified just for this for loop, and once you're done with it, then this variable will be destroyed, so you don't have to worry about what it's doing once the for loop has ran its course. And the most common variable people use, though it doesn't matter, is the I, just the plain character I for the variable. So I equals 0, and that gets our first parameter done. Now we'll tell it how many times this for loop will run. I is less than 5. Okay, so because I is less than 5, we know it's going to run until I equals 5. I know that doesn't actually say I equals 5. I guess I kind of implied that's what I was typing, but not really. Basically, we're just going to run this for loop until I equals 5. We've set up our variable, and since it's less than 5, we're going to increase I by 1. And we're going to keep doing that until I equals 5. And while this is going on, in curly braces, we can actually tell what is going to be tagging along with this for loop. Now, this can be any kind of code. You could make a ball move across the screen multiple times or anything like that. But for this, we're just going to type in plus equals 1. Now, I know that there's a much easier way I could have done this. I could have just put it in the step event, for example, and I would have gotten the same result, but this is just a tutorial. You can do a lot more complicated things in a smaller amount of time using a for loop, and you'll quickly figure that out once you start using them. So we've got that set up in the create event. Now we want to go to, actually no, let's not go to the draw event. Let's go back to the create event, and in this we'll just type in show message in. Okay, so let's add this to a room now and run it. Okay, we get 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so you can see that this for loop has ran so many times, and it executed this code each time. Okay, so that's all there is to a for loop. You can get more complicated with them once you start using them, and you'll kind of figure out when to use a for loop over a while loop or a do until loop. It's just something you gotta practice with, find out what works best in different situations and things like that. So next I'll be covering the while loop. Okay, the while loop and the do until loop can potentially lock up your computer. If you do them correctly, that shouldn't happen, but I've been using GameMaker since I was 8, and sometimes I still fall into the trap of locking up my computer, and I have to use Control-Alt-Delete in the process, and it's a whole big ordeal that you want to try to avoid if you can. Now, I'm not saying you're going to avoid it every time, but try your best. And for this reason, anytime you're going to use a while loop, you may want to save your progress just in case. Okay, so type in while, and there is the syntax to the while loop. You could probably look at this and figure out exactly how it's going to work, but I'll explain it anyway. While n is below 5, increase n by 1. Once n equals 5, then it ends this while loop because n is no longer less than 5. And we can, well actually, let's go ahead and add in that show message again. Now the reason I'm not actually drawing any text to the screen is because the computer is actually going to handle this loop so quickly that you're not actually going to see the number increasing. As soon as the game runs and the screen comes up, it's already going to be at 5, no matter what. So I'm just going to use show message so it kind of pauses and lets you see what it equals each time. So let's run this. So we get 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay. So we can end that. So that is how you use a while loop. Now we'll move on to the do until loop, which is actually incredibly similar to the while loop, but when you use a do until loop, whatever code you have written to be executed repeatedly, the do until loop is going to make sure that it's executed at least once before that loop ends. Now, it's not always guaranteed for this to happen in a while loop. Personally, I've never actually used a do until loop. I've never run across a time where I had to use it, so, you know, you may be different than me, you may use it, you may not, but it's still good for you to know. So how you do a do until loop. You type in do, and then in curly braces, we'll type in n plus equals 1 and show message. And then we'll type in until. Okay, so once again, you can kind of understand how this works, but I'm going to explain it anyway. Basically, GameMaker is going to do this until n equals 5. Okay, so let's go ahead and run it. One, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so that is how you do a for, while, and do until loop. Now, once you start experimenting, you'll find out which ones work best in different situations, as I've said. So it's best for you to just kind of go out there and start experimenting. If you have a project you're working on now, then go on ahead and try incorporating it in any way just to kind of experiment, but be sure to save your work just in case you accidentally mess anything up, which, you know, is easy to do when you're programming. especially if you're trying to put in something you're not particularly familiar with, of course. But go on ahead and experiment with it if you want. Just create this little example that I have shown in this tutorial, and just have fun. That's about it for this tutorial, so thank you for watching. Please comment, rate, and subscribe, and I will see you next time.